What if time spent being quote unquote unproductive was actually your greatest superpower and gift that your mind can give you? I am thrilled to bring you this conversation today with Dr. Moshe Bar, who is a genius. I will share a little bit more about him in a second, but first, I'd like to welcome you to the Brand Gravity Show. I'm your host, psychology-driven brand strategist Kaye Putnam. And here on the show, we explore the intersection between branding and psychology. And one of the most important things that we can do as a brand builder is to understand our own mind, both for the benefit of getting our own mind to do what we want, but also to understand how other people's minds are perceiving our brand and coming to conclusions about what we're doing and what we're offering and how we're impacting the world. Moshe Bar, PhD, is the former director of the Cognitive Neuroscience Lab at Harvard Medical School and the Massachusetts General Hospital. He's an internationally renowned cognitive neuroscientist. He has a PhD in cognitive neuroscience from the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. For his outstanding research and academic achievements, he's received many honors and awards, including the prestigious 21st Century Science Initiative Award from the McDonnell Foundation and the Hebb Award from the International Neural Networks Society. He headed the Gonda Multidisciplinary Brain Research Center at Bar Ilan University in Israel until recently. And he's the author of a recent book titled Mindwandering. Let's jump straight in. Dr. Bar, thank you so much for making the time to have this conversation. I would love to start by setting the stage and asking you, why do we mind wander?
Okay, so mind wandering is really a collection of processes that are happening in our mental life, and it contains good and bad things. Primarily good, I think. That's why I overall, recommend doing it as often as possible. So things such as planning, just before this conversation, both of us might have created some planning, some thoughts about the future. Decision making depends on the mental simulations that we do while we wander. Creative incubation, the birth of creative ideas happen while we wander, and many other good things that really take place in our wandering mind. But when I say bad things, when you think about repetitive worries or clinical conditions such as ruminations, where we keep thinking about the same nagging issue over and over and over. So these are not desirable mind wandering. So it's a collection of processes, and some of them are better for us and some are less. And our task is to distinguish, what to encourage and what less.
Yes. As entrepreneurs, I think we sometimes give ourselves a lot of, we feel a lot of shame around not being productive all of the time. There's a lot of advice to wake up at 4 a.m. and to have this very regimented, structured day to get the most out of your brain. But what you're telling us is that there's actually a whole lot of magic that can happen when we're not intentionally working on a task. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. So what I realized as I was working on my book, and also as I've been getting feedback from people, is really that society has instilled in us, not necessarily deliberately, but instilled in us a feeling of guilt when we're not on target, when we're not productive. And of course, It's very good to be productive, and it even improves our mood very often. But we kind of feel guilty every time we catch ourselves, or when others catch us wandering. But, my kids grew up differently with a father that encourages them to stay on the sofa and stare at the ceiling, because many good things come out of it. All our creative juices, all our preparing for an interview, preparing for some meeting with a friend, you want to break some news to them or want to help them in some way, and you kind of rehearse the conversation ahead of time, and you kind of plan for possible scenarios. So we really, on a day-to-day basis, we don't realize to what extent we rely on these simulations we do ahead of time. So mind wandering is really a critical faculty that we own. And when I occasionally go to Vipassana, silence retreats, and they keep telling us, to live in the moment, be exclusively in the present, I tell them that if that's what I'll do, I'll be run over by a bus very quickly, because you really always have to think ahead, kind of plan your steps and choose between path A or path B. And you can't do this without wandering. So productivity, of course, it's important, but the in between intervals of simulating and playing with possible scenarios in our mind is crucial for our well being and for our survival.
And particularly for entrepreneurs, because we're tasked, a lot of our job is to be creative, is to come up with new ideas, new products, new campaigns, all of those things.
Yeah.
What, on a practical level, does mind wandering look like? Does it look like somebody looking at their phone? How can you tell if you're mind wandering or not?
Well, when you mind wander, you're somewhere else with your mind. And scientifically, it's been already reported that this is a stunning number, but 47% of the time we are somewhere else. So, think about it. Half of your waking hours, your mind is not where your body is. It's crazy.
It's
And
wild.
yeah, and the thing is that your question is really on target, because we don't realize when we mind wander. While we're wandering, we don't realize it. We just realize after the fact, oh, I've been just somewhere else for the last 3 minutes or so. Things happened around me, but I wasn't aware because my mind was somewhere else. So it's not necessarily looking at your phone. You can be
Yeah.
wondering while you're looking at me and nodding with your head, but still, your mind might be thinking about dinner or lunch or whatever, right? So you might be thinking about something else while you're doing something. So it's really
Hmm.
hard to say from the outside, and it's really hard to say when you're in it. But as I say before, these are critical moments and intervals that we should nourish in some way, especially once we develop the skills of distinguishing good from bad mind wandering. And when is it? Obviously, I don't want to mind wander when my little daughter comes back from school and wants to tell me a story. But
Yeah.
it's completely okay to stay extra 10 minutes in bed and let your mind run in all directions. And you're right completely that entrepreneurs and copywriters or anywhere where you need ideas, you really need mind wandering. It's really hard to it's funny. I've reached a stage where I see people quote me on Twitter, and I don't really recognize the quote, but they said something smarter that I said, like, apparently, that the path to a good idea is to drift. So really,
Mm.
it's you need to travel, to let your mind, to set it free in order to come back with a good idea. And the same, if I might, because you talk about the more business and entrepreneur environment. The same goes also outside our mind, and I refer specifically to brainstorming. So the process of let's have a brainstorming session. You want creative ideas coming out of your crew, and what is the right atmosphere? So the same way that we don't want in the brain, when you wonder, this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is like the CEO of the brain. Okay.
Mm.
And the thing is that for healthy, broad, creative mind wandering, you want mind wandering to be unleashed, to roam without censorship, so to speak. And the analog to this prefrontal cortex is really your boss. So imagine a boss sitting in a brainstorming session, or the atmosphere being such that, oh, this is a bad idea, or people laugh at some idea, or this is crazy, or this is not going to work. No, a good brainstorming session, like a good mind wandering session, is one where everything goes, right? So there is, in a creative process, we like to think about a diamond shape. So initially you have something we call divergent thinking, where people are
Mm.
or where we generate as many ideas as possible. There's nothing stupid, there's nothing dumb. Everything goes just as crazy, go as crazy. And during this divergent thinking, you really generate as many ideas as possible. And then there's the second part of the diamond shape, but which we call converging thinking. Then you evaluate all these many ideas, and you narrow in on the one that's really most interesting, most desirable, most likely to accomplish what you want in the most creative manner. So a good brainstorming session, just like a good mind wandering session, is one when there's no censor, when there's nobody that tells you this is funny and not going to work.
I have notes and notebooks on my both on my phone and physical, from being in obscure places where the best ideas come to me. It's almost a cliche, right? We make associations when we're in the shower or on a treadmill or doing something that isn't the task at hand. And that's fertile ground for those amazing ideas. So that's what it looks like for me, but I'm sure it's different for everybody. What was the most surprising finding from your research as you're putting this book together?
Well, I like to be surprised every day. So, on the one hand, you do so mind wandering, as I said before, really prepares us for the future. It kind of generates all the scenarios and you lean on memory. What we've learned over the years is that the real purpose of memory is to serve the future. So we store all these experiences and also simulated experiences that we imagine. And then when a certain situation is encountered, you kind of retrieve from memory something that's like it, and you act based on this script. So it's good to plan. It's good to know what's expecting you behind the corner. But at the same time, and this is really back to Buddhism and what they teach us in these silent retreats, is that when you approach the world unsurprised, completely expert, you miss out on a lot of possible experiences. So this is the opposite of mind wandering, where you really want to be, they call it beginner's mind. Even if you're an expert with the gray hair that I have here, students come to my office and want to suggest a new idea. I can just sit there and say, no, it's been tried before, be a skeptical expert, or can be an open-minded like a child. A beginner's mind is like being a child. So a child sees a flower for the first time. This is an amazing creation, right? But for us, we just pass by a beautiful flower on the street, and something in our mind, we label it as flower and we move on. So when I say that I like to be surprised as much as possible, obviously not with lethal, hurtful things, but with things that I haven't encountered before, or with things that make me think in a different manner. So, by now I forgot what was the original question, but the idea here is really that I've drifted. But so I'm not sure I can single out one thing, but actually it does speak to what I was just saying. So on the one hand, our mind strives for certainty. We want to minimize uncertainty. We want to know where we're going. We want to know what to expect and how to prepare for it. But at the same time, it's an obstacle for our experiencing our life to the fullest. So it's really a balance, not only the balance I mentioned before between good and bad mind wandering, but also when are the times that you want to be in the present and when are the times that you want to be ready. So these are kind of things that people have to reconcile for themselves based on their own lifestyle.
One of the things that entrepreneurs do as brand builders is we're being very intentional about the associations that we're creating in people's minds. So I imagine that being more aware of how your own brain is making all of these different associations is useful. I know that you talked about this a bit in the book, but how do you turn up that level of awareness of what's going on in your mind?
Well, I think understanding the principles as I lay out in the book is already making you more aware, because you're understanding more and more about what's going on in your mind, and then you become more conscious of it and take notes and divert yourself. I mean, on the one hand, our thinking process and mind wandering is a wild beast that you can't really direct, but at the same time, you can observe it. You can observe it and see patterns and see my mind wandering now is very fruitful. It's very interesting. I come up with good ideas. I'm going to continue mind wandering. I'm not going to interrupt it. Versus my mind wandering now is just tapping on the same and cycling around the same topic that is tormenting me. Let me just be busy with something else and be productive. This is a good time to be productive.
Yep. So entrepreneurs tend to have a very high incidence or high occurrence of ADHD and other neurodivergent thinking. Is mind wandering a different experience for somebody that has ADHD? Do they have to approach it differently, or can you speak to that?
Yeah. So, well, ADHD is a topic that's close to my heart. I'm a proud owner of ADHD myself, and my kids the same. And a lot of what I try to do in the book is actually to talk, to praise it and not call it necessarily a disorder. And I think when it's not debilitating, it's really a source of creativity. And I am not, I'm not surprised that many entrepreneurs and creative people are also ADHD, because I think this is really the best condition to be creative. So people with different dispositions would have different types of mind wandering. It's true that people with ADHD would mind wander more. But even if you take two individuals that mind wander the same percent of the time of the day, one of them with ADHD and one of them is without, and let's add a third one in depression, right? So ADHD, healthy and depressed. If you could pick in and look at their, you'll see that all of them mind wander, but mind wander in different ways. So the ADHD creative mind wandering will be broad, will go all over our semantic network in our brain and jump from one idea to another in a coherent manner. It's not, schizophrenia. It's coherent, but it's all over the place. And it's like, oh my God, where did you come up with this idea, right? So this is really the vehicle for creativity. Healthy individual will mind wander, in a close vicinity, not ruminating, but not too wild. And if we play free associations with them in the lab, we see that they provide good associations, but mundane, not to say boring, but the most typical ones. People in depression will also mind wander, but they'll be very narrow, as I said before. They'll be cyclical, ruminative, and keep coming back to the same topic. So they all mind wander to the same extent, more or less, but the nature of their mind wandering and the content of their mind wandering will be different.
We're going to get right back to the interview. For the next few seconds, I'm going to share with you my brand Clarity Collective and how it can help you grow your income and impact. If you're an entrepreneur who feels stuck or uncertain about what makes your brand stand out, then this is for you. The Brand Clarity Collective is a mastermind multiplied by mentorship. It's part online curriculum, part digital mastermind, and it's designed to help you get crystal clear brand clarity so you attract more perfect clients and grow your business. We have a thriving community of entrepreneurs who are all smart and driven. As a member of the collective, you get an all-access pass to all of my best branding courses, as well as access to our private community where you can connect with like-minded entrepreneurs and get feedback and support directly from me on our coaching calls. The Brand Clarity Collective is priced at just $297 per month, and after 6 months, you keep lifetime access to all of the courses. To learn more and to see if it's right for you, head over to my homepage at kayeputnam.com. There's a big section where you can click to learn more. I'll also include the link in the show notes wherever you are listening or watching. All right, let's get back.
Is there a way to structure your day? And I feel like that's almost an oxymoron. I'm trying to apply strict rules to this process that is naturally happening all of the time. But how do we get the most out of mind wandering? Do you literally set time aside in your day to do it? Or do you just observe when it's happening? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I know it's funny. I was just finishing a consulting gig with a big company. I won't mention their name. It starts with G. So this company, they have this giant think tank. Well, it's not giant, a big think tank. And the head of this place she was really into how do I make my people more creative. They have to solve a big secret problem and they have to be as creative as possible. And she came up with the best guess that she could have, which was, let's have X% of the day unstructured. You can do whatever you want. And this is not a great idea. It might be a good start, but this is not a good idea because, first of all, people don't know what to do with this time. So they start doing yoga or doing their errands or whatever. But it's really unstructured is nice, but it's not fulfilling what you want. So the first thing to really realize is, as I said before, that mind wandering, it really has a mind of its own. So it happens when it wants and it doesn't happen when it doesn't want. Or to put it differently, it really depends on the context. So the idea I try to promote there is that you should be attuned to what's happening. And as I said before, if your mind wandering is positive, just try to look for the best setup to continue letting it go. Letting it continue. telling yourself 3 p.m. to 3:30, I'm going to mind wander is not going to lead to anything because you'll be sitting and just ruminating on the last email that you've received, right? So you can't really summon mind wandering on demand because, if we could control our thoughts, people would not suffer from trauma and from intrusive thoughts. People could be very different, but luckily or not, our thinking pattern goes wherever it wants. In the book, in the appendix there, I give some tips on how to maximize the likelihood of A, mind wandering, and B, mind wandering that's productive. So if I go for a run and I know I'm going to be thinking about all kinds of things, I ask myself, what do I want to be thinking about? Do I want to think about the bills I just paid? No, maybe I'll read a paragraph from a book that's really intriguing for me. And this increases the chances that when spontaneous mind wandering evoke, then they'll be dwelling on something they just read. But I do have to mention that there's something in psychology called the ironic process, where it's a nice experiment that was done after a short story by Dostoevsky, where you bring subjects to the lab, participants, and you ask them not to think about polar bears. And guess what? The only thing they think about is polar bears. So we can't really direct our thoughts. We can't really put mind wandering in our calendar, really, but we can decrease the feeling of guilt when we do, and to increase the situations that we know that help us wander. So I don't think about traffic jams as such a huge disaster when I realize I have this whole theater in my inside, in between my ears, that can work on being bored and then work on interesting problems, consciously or not. I mean, a lot of what we call creative incubation happens behind the screens of consciousness. So some of this is happening without our conscious awareness.
I love that. I love that so much. Diverting a little bit, but I promise it feels related. AI is becoming a massive thing, especially in the creative industries. AI is copywriting for us. It's designing graphics. It's coming up with new images. What is the difference between the way that our brain works and, at least right now, how AI is working in terms of creativity?
Yeah, well, I gave a talk when the book just came out. It was last February. Either it was the Royal Institution in England or maybe Google. And so there were a lot of programmers there. And I told them that it would be amazing if they could incorporate mind wandering into their algorithms. And I can go on and on about this, and you stop me where it stops being relevant. But the idea here is that because, as I said before, society has instilled in us all this guilt, when you wander, you're not productive, and you want your algorithm to be productive, you just try to get rid of things that you think are bad for you. But now when neuroscience has realized that mind wandering serves an important function. I mean, mind wandering takes place in a giant cortical network called the default mode network. And it expends tons of energy, metabolic energy. Evolution wouldn't have us do all these things for half of our day if it didn't serve a purpose. Okay, so now that we realize it does all these important things and it runs all these simulations before we take decisions, and it helps us prepare for job interviews and for conversations with our friends, and to kind of plan ahead all kind of scenarios, then imagine you have an algorithm that takes time, it takes effort, but in between things will kind of pause and stop doing what the programmer wanted it to do and just wonder. What are the benefits? And I think if it works for humans, it would work for AI. So this is really something that's lacking in AI. I can't be specific now about how mind wandering should be implemented in artificial algorithms, in artificial intelligence. But for me, as someone who really believes 100% in the power of the brain, I would say, and the power of evolution, I would say, let's just copy it and see where it goes.
Yeah. I imagine we would get more output that is less of what we expect or less of what is useful, similar to our own brain. Sometimes we're connecting ideas about branding and then thinking about doing the dishes, for example. I feel like that would happen, but you're right. That would, by the nature of it, it would create more creativity and generate more creative answers than the very linear way that it's working right now. To me, at least in my experience so far, and it's relatively limited, but it's such a great tool because I can make the I can ask the weird questions. I can make the interesting connections between two disparate ideas and then see what the AI comes up with its more linear way of thinking. So it's going to be very interesting as this continues to develop. One thing that we haven't touched on yet that I want to make sure that we do before we finish is this connection between mood and mind wandering. Can you speak to that a bit?
Sure, yeah. I just got off the phone before I spoke with you with investors because this connection that you mentioned is so strong, and I'll elaborate it in a second. That we even opened a company that uses it, Mindwandering, to improve mood in depression and also in healthy individuals. So the surprising for me by now, it's not that surprising, but when we discovered it, when we stumbled on this finding, it was stunning. And one of the most rewarding aspects for scientists is that when chips fall into the right place, and then you look around and you kind of make connections also with other people's studies, and it all suddenly it makes sense. The idea here is that if you can make people think broadly, and when I say broadly, let's think about a chain of thoughts or a chain of words. So I can say table, and then you say chair, and then tablecloth, and plate, and utensils, and it all legitimate associations. Nothing is negative here, but it's very narrow. It all stays around the topic, same topic. And if you take a different group of participants and you show them different lists of words that expand more broadly, so you say table, and then you say wood, and then you say forest, and then you think camping, and then you think bear, and then you think zoo, and then you think animal rights. So very quickly you've drifted very far away. And we realized that those people who read the broad associations, the expanding chains of words, we measured their mood before and after, and we found that the broad chains of words or the broad associations elicited more positive mood. And from that, we kind of expanded our research and tested this link from different angles, showing all together that when we think broadly, when we think, as I said before, uninhibited, unconstricted, uncensored, the result is not only better ideas, but also more positive mood. And I think, this has a lot of potential as we try to implement now in improving clinical situations. And what's interesting about this is that this relationship is reciprocal. So people in good mood are more creative, and people that are more creative are in better mood. Of course, there are always exceptions. And this can bring us back to the brainstorming room, where you do want your crew to be in a good mood when you invite them to the conference room for a brainstorming session. So people in better mood will come up with better ideas.
I think that's so interesting how it works in both directions. And I think a lot of creatives do this intuitively, where they recognize what time of day tends to be their most productive in terms of creative work, because they're in a better mood or they have higher energy. So they're able to approach that work. And then you suggested also the flip side. So if you are in, I don't know if we want to say in a bad mood, but if we're in a lower mood, to actually direct our attention towards something that isn't so creative can be more productive when we have more of that narrow focus. Is it kind of a chicken and the egg, like you said? So they influence the other, and you can make decisions in both directions.
Yeah. But it's a chicken and egg in a good way, that you can exploit it in different directions, not in a sense that you really can track the origin. Yes, it's a good way to put it.
Incredible. So to finish up, I'd love to ask you two shorter questions. You mentioned something about the fact that we can learn from imagined experiences, and my audience is a group of learners. So can you share either an exercise, or how do we tap into that power that we have?
Yeah, happy to address this. So, as I alluded to before, we used to think that our memory is a result of our experience, right? So as a child, you might touch the stove and you realize that, a little flame is hot and it's burning and I shouldn't be touching it again. Or a good friend of mine, when I tell her this joke or take her to this restaurant, she responds like that or like this. And we kind of store in our library, in our memory, all these scenarios and all these experiences. And when they come up again, maybe in different forms and shapes, we know how to act based on these scripts that we have. But because our mind is so powerful, and now we realize that mind wandering allows us to generate imaginary scenarios, then you can also learn from things and act on things that haven't happened before, but you've imagined them. So it started with a funny example. This research program of mine started in a funny example, and it's almost ridiculous, but it does deliver the point. So I was sitting on a plane and reviewing some scientific paper. I had a blanket on my lap, and I was writing comments on the paper, and then I started to be a little bored, and my mind wandered, and my eyes wandered, and my eyes kind of landed on the emergency exit door. And my mind started thinking, what if this door, opens while we're flying, and all of us will be thrown out, and we're all gonna die. So I think, I'll need a parachute, but there's no parachutes. Or maybe I can use this blanket as a parachute, but the wind will be too strong. So I have to make holes in the blanket so I can hold on to it. How would I make the holes? I have a pen in my hands. I can make punch holes. Of course, this is a very unlikely scenario and also very unlikely to work in this case. But the idea here is that I generated a new scenario, and now I can store it in my memory just like an actual experience. This is an imagined experience, but if something like this or like a more likely scenario that I might be imagining happens, then I can act based on what I imagined. So this is where we can learn from. And it's not only learning, it's also acting. I can ask you now, Kaye, would you like a sandwich with strawberry jam and sardines? You don't need to try it in order to say, yeah, I don't want it, right? Because you access your memory, the different tastes and the combination, and you were able to create this new scenario or this new state and make a decision without even, leaving your chair and without seeing the ingredients in front of you. So we have this amazing organ that can generate experiences for us. The philosopher Karl Popper said, we let our hypothesis die in our stead. Meaning that, you kind of generate all these alternative paths and you choose the one that you want. Shall I leave this room through the door, through the window, through the ceiling? And I kind of run quick simulations like, no, the safest or the fastest will be through the door. And you don't need to try each one of them. So you can imagine alternative scenarios and choose the one without really, think if we had to try everything before we can make a decision, this will be killed very quickly.
Yes.
I hope you have another question and we're not ending with a killed.
I do have one more question. Before I ask my final question, where can people find, so there's the book, Mindwandering, that people should absolutely buy and read. Is there anywhere else where they can go to learn more about you and your research and your work?
Yeah, actually, I have a webpage called Moshe Bar, which is my name, my first and last name, one word, moshebar.org, and there's everything about our research. You can read, not only get the book, but also read our scientific papers, see interviews, and things like this. And I'm very accessible. I like to talk about this stuff, so hopefully people can gain from it.
It's fascinating. I'm so glad that we had this conversation. Final question. If there is one thing that people could do after this conversation, now that they know what they know from hearing everything that you have shared with us, what would you like them to do?
Close their eyes and wonder. It's of course, you can't really, as I said, summon this, but feel less guilty about their jumpy mind. I think it's something that we should embrace.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you, Dr. Bar, for your time and for your genius. This was such an amazing conversation.
Pleasure speaking with you, Kaye.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Are you like me and have been berating yourself or feeling down about a lack of productivity, quote unquote productivity? And I hope, if that is also you, that you take this to heart and you give yourself a bit more grace and perhaps a bit more space to do some more of your own mind wandering, especially the intentional kind where we're noodling on important creative projects or work and things that are going to serve and impact the world. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the conversation, please head over either to Twitter or to Moshe's website and thank him for his time and for sharing his genius. And do pick up his book wherever you like to buy books. Thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.